Do you know off the top of your head where our refining fleet is today? Are we still at 14 down or?
Well, every day there's a report that comes out at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, and it's very hard to read now because they're this is off the top of my head, but they have in the Gulf Coast we have about 7.6 million barrels a day of refining capacity, and what it shows is the number that are shut down, and the number shut down now is getting to be a relatively small number, 600,000 or 700,000 barrels a day, I believe. Then the next column is just starting up, and then the next column is operating at less than full capacity. And the final column is back to full capacity. And the back to full capacity a day or two ago was basically 40%.
Okay.
But what you don't have any idea of is when it says less than full capacity, does that mean 98% or does it mean 15%?
Yes.
In the meantime, the Gulf of Mexico production, which should have been 1.3, is back to about 45%.
Correct.
Coming on very slowly. So even if you got the refiners all running, then you'd suck the gasoline, the crude oil pool down.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the problems is that we went into the two hurricanes with the lowest available stocks we'd had in years. So the stock numbers the EIA numbers that just came out this morning were sort of awash with last week.
Mm-hmm.
Tiny bit of improvement in the gasoline pool. An improvement in the Gulf of Mexico because they had all these tankers that couldn't unload. So we kind of have 2 weeks in one. But the gasoline supplies as of a week ago were back in the United States, as reported, were back to where they last were in August 1967.
Really?
Yeah. Now in August 1967, I should look this up, but my guess is that we were using probably about 4 million barrels a day of motor gasoline.
Okay.
That statistic alone should have been basically
A big alarm bell.
a huge alarm bell that we better curtail driving until we fix this problem.
Well, I think we have certainly a group of policymakers that are ignoring the fundamentals of this system.
Well, most of our policymakers aren't ignoring it, they just don't understand it. But what's more alarming to me is how many people that are supposed experts that the policymakers listen to say, oh, this problem will be fixed in a matter of days. This is just the remnants of Ike.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you a little bit about the logistics of basically how we make our system work, because that's what people don't really understand. Is if you trace a barrel of oil, that comes out of any of the wells in the Middle East, it takes about 5 to 20 days to collect the oil in these processing centers and strip out the sulfur,
Sure.
and strip out the water, and strip out the entrapped gas, so that you have refinable crude oil, or crude oil that is quality enough to put on a tanker.
Mm-hmm.
It then takes the tanker about 60 days to travel from any of the ports in the Arabian Gulf or the Persian Gulf to get to Loop.
Mm-hmm.
Takes about 2 days to unload the tanker, and then basically they get shipped to Lake St. Charles, Lake Charles.
Yeah, the Lake Charles.
And they enter the Capline pipeline, which is 1.2 million barrels a day, and that's our central artery that goes up and sort of spreads around, like the heart going down to your feet. That's crude oil.
Mm-hmm.
Once a barrel of crude gets to the refinery and starts in the refinery system, it takes about 30 days to process it. That about half the barrel turns out to be motor gasoline.
Right.
And about a third of the barrel is diesel. That's a 30-day process to bake the crude. Then you have finished product at the refinery that has to be distributed. We have effectively 15 to 20 refineries serving 170,000 service stations around the United States.
Mm-hmm.
The two biggest finished product pipelines we have in the United States are the Explorer line, which goes from the Gulf Coast up to Chicago and then spreads out, and Colonial Pipeline, which is like a 28-lane highway when it starts out, but every time it gets to a major center, it breaks off, and it finally ends up in the New York Harbor. The gasoline in the Colonial Pipeline travels at 4 miles an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So if you trace that through, it's effectively an eternity from the time a barrel of oil gets produced in the Middle East until it arrives as finished gasoline in Atlanta.
Hence your comparison to the run on the bank.
Yeah.
You would drain this system in no time.
Yeah. But the number of people that actually are kind of familiar with our logistical delivery system are about the same number of people as know how the sewage system works in Houston.
Okay.
I'm not sure who those people are in Houston.
Well, if I look at that description and I realize that we don't have a strategic petroleum reserve for gasoline.
Yeah.
We simply don't.
Yeah.
Then what we've really set up for ourselves is a case where if we can't import finished products,
Then we have a shortage.
we have a shortage.
Yeah.
And right now I haven't seen anybody talking about a shortage in gasoline and what that might mean to the economy.
Well, I have been.
Well, I've heard you talk about it, but I haven't heard, even just right now when we're hearing what's happening in the...
On Monday morning, for the first time in 2 weeks, there was a sort of 3-minute program on the gasoline shortages.
Mm-hmm.
And on CNN Morning News, there was a report. I think CNN had a report this weekend. But what both programs said is this is a problem that's going to linger around for about 2 more weeks. No, it's not.
Well, it can't
It's
add
going to
up.
be worse
Mm-hmm.
in 2 weeks unless we stop. Because again, it's only when you crimp the supply coming in, and you're still drinking out of the other end of the hose,
Mm-hmm.
you can drink until the water's gone.
Mm-hmm.
But you will take the water out of the hose. Then what you have to do is say, how long will it take to refill the hose?
Well, and at 4 miles an hour, that's going to take quite some time.
Yeah.
And in addition, if I look at what the president was saying about the financial meltdown, he's saying every day we don't do something,
Yeah.
this crisis only gets worse.
See, the financial meltdown can be fixed by paper. But there is not a Federal Reserve that can print motor gasoline.
Well, and you look at even go back to the .com situation we were talking about earlier. That one was in cyberspace as well.
Yeah.
These are real hard assets, and
Yeah.
something does need to
Now,
get
there
done.
are some of our oil pundits that have been talking for the last decade about how technology can basically create GPS systems and digitized oil systems will pull oil out of the ground. Maybe that'll bail us out.
Well, if I look at where we're sitting today, this is an election year. Do you think either one of these candidates can get their arms around this situation?
I wouldn't think so. Senator Obama, about half of his plans are kind of make a little bit of sense.
Mm-hmm.
The other half don't at all. But I can't find 10% of Senator McCain's that make any sense. And I wish I could say the opposite. But McCain has the Wall Street Journal asked both candidates to nominate someone to be their energy spokesman for a blog that they ran.
Uh-huh.
And the guy that Senator McCain has, I haven't found anybody even knows who he is. I've spoken to 2 or 3 of the people that are kind of helping Obama, and they don't know much about energy. In fact, they all tend to have an environmental background. And my suspicion is that environmentalists, have not found many environmentalists that actually really know much about physical energy. In fact, they've spent too much of their career fighting energy. So I think that in both cases, we're sort of flying blind.
Well, earlier we talked about how the phone calls coming in from the constituency to the Congress and the Senate are saying, do not do this bailout.
Yeah.
One of the things I am seeing is that the public is getting more active in what the Senate and the Congress are doing.
Mm-hmm.
If I were going to try and give them a crib sheet on where this Congress needs to be focusing its efforts, what should they be calling and asking for?
What Congress should realize is that we have 2 twin diseases we have to deal with. One is sort of asthma or tuberculosis, which is how I would describe the financial crisis.
Okay.
The other is potentially terminal cancer, which is how I describe where we are on energy right now. And don't confuse the two.